Hello, everyone, to this particularly, I don't know why I can't get all this straight before I start streaming, but we always have time before people come online anyway. Welcome to this gross daytime edition of the Orphan's Tales Live reading series. We're doing it early because my husband is going to be doing a cooped up cabaret concert at 8 p.m. over on Twitch, so I am clearing the bandwidth for him to be able to do that. It is therefore still daylight, which ruins my whole aesthetic, honestly. It's terrible in here and weird and yuck. You can't even see my flickering firelight that I so carefully put together. Hi, I'm so glad you love space opera. That is lovely to hear. I worked so hard on it in the room that way. I did. I worked so hard on space opera. Whenever anybody tells me that they like it, I'm like, it was so hard. It was so hard. Whereas I'm so far beyond Orphan's Tales, I don't remember if it was hard. It was probably hard. Let's do our intro business so we can move along. I actually don't think we're going to get to the end of the book tonight. I think it's going to be tomorrow night, which is perfect because tomorrow night is night 20 and it's a Sunday, so it's a perfect time to end on it. I mean, yes, my hair that I've got roots like that lady in Michigan, and I ran out of my normal hair product, so it's all weird with whatever I could dig out of the hole under my sink. Anyway, so as always, for legal purposes, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. This is a one-woman show, a play. You can find the lovely music that we always listen to at the beginning of these at sjtucker.com. She has done an album based on each of the Orphan's Tales books. Book 1 that we have been reading this whole time is In the Night Garden. Book 2 is In the Cities of Coin and Spice, which at this point I feel like we are actually going to get to. I don't know. But either way, SJ is the genius behind the sound. Michigan lady wears nothing with grace. She's a terrible person. She needs to go home. Anyway, so yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Kat Valenti. You can subscribe to my Patreon. I am Kat Valenti on Patreon. And there is a tip jar in my Instagram profile, one on my website as well, at katherinemvalenti.com. These are absolutely free from me to you. Just a gift, but they are quite a lot of work to put together. And if you if you're moved to in any way put something in the tip jar, it is so deeply appreciated. You guys have literally fed us with your tips over the last week. It is a particular kind of magic to keep supporting art in times like this. So thank you so much, and thank you particularly to Elizabeth, Jamie, and Lynn, who tipped me yesterday. You guys are all amazing and absolutely my heroes, 100%, from the bottom of my heart. So why don't we get started with The King's Tale? I don't ever want to dog-ear these pages because this is my copy. This is my first edition from back in the day. But it also makes it hard to find my place again. So here we go. I'm going to tell a story about a bad king. It's absolutely not relevant anyway to our current situation. The King's Tale. His face was so fat on the pillow, like a slab of meat on a white tablecloth, all spidery red blood vessels and swollen nose. He hadn't slept in the same bed with my mother for years, but then no one did. I think I would have actually preferred it if she had a lover. It would have meant she was human. But she never let anyone between her legs. She spent every night in a shabby old bed in a shabby old tower. My father slept in the great ebony four-poster bed that was meant for the Lord and his lady. Didn't you know? My father was never king. A country baron at best. Some winters the pigs and the cows slept in the great hall to keep them from keeling over in the frost. The stink of it reached the rafters and hung there like a dung-spattered chandelier. My mother was better than that. I was better than that. I used to watch her profile against her window, and wonder how she ever married the sack of onions and pig snouts I called a father. I heard from servants that he wasn't always so useless. Before my mother shut up her mouth with grief, this was a rich place, and the cows slept in the grass where they belonged. But things were as they lay. She never said anything. She never said a word. My mother had kept silent as a nun since the day my sister was taken from her. I was an infant when she vanished from us. I never knew that sister. But her absence stalked the house like an hungry dog. The hole where she had been took up space at our dinner table. It sagged and slumped in the musty air. It ate and drank and breathed down all our necks. My other sisters were married off before I could manage arithmetic. I grew up alone in that silent house with nothing but the stinking cows and my mute mother and the hole. Even my father didn't want to spend his days there. He stayed in the fields directing hay, rolling, and goat breeding until it was dark enough to slip back inside without anyone bothering him. But still, the hole answered the bell when he rang, and he had to scurry to bed with his head down to avoid looking it in the eye. I didn't think anyone would miss him. He was a fool now, feeble as a sheep after shearing, and I was well into manhood, ready to be barren, hungry for it, tired of the ramshackle place falling down around us, propped up only by a hole in the air, by empty space. Dirt farming squalor like my father always has a kind of rude health, and if I knew I wanted a barony, I would have to take it. It wasn't even very quiet going up the stairs to his room. I stomped like anything. In that dead house, who would care if one more dead thing turned belly up by morning? But the hole was there. I could feel it tugging at my sleeves with sisterly disapproval. If she had been there the whole side sadly, there would have been no silence, and I wouldn't need to hear my own father's screaming just to know I was alive. The hole was sorry for me, and I hated it. But he didn't scream. It was easy as cutting meat for roast. I didn't even think when I slid the knife into his ox-huge heart. I just did it. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Killing, I thought, should be harder than this. His eyes flapped open. He gurgled a little more. No more than a calf will when you cave in its skull for the summer banquets. He didn't scream. I wasn't alive. But I was barren. Mother watched me coming down the stairs, wiping blood on my trousers. She stared, and her mouth was thin and colorless, but she said nothing. She never did. The barony was better from my hand. I knew it would be. The fields gave grain, the trees gave cider, the pigs slept in the penned muck and grew sweet with fat. The dust was swept from every corner of the great hall, and long white banners were hung from the well-scrubbed rafters. Folk came to the castle again. There was music and dancing when the summer broke the spring. The hole never came back. Finally, it was time to choose a wife. I didn't really care, but I was told it was the lordly thing to do. And already I was considering how to move myself into a crown the way some men consider how to move themselves into a larger house by the sea. A king has to have a queen. A baron has to have a baroness. So it was that I consulted the family books, oily and filth-stained as they were, and discovered how my mother managed to marry a sack of onions and pig snouts. In our backward, beer-addled family, a wife is gotten by contest, not by courting. There is a belt of gold and jasper handed down grandmother to granddaughter, and the next lady of the house must fit the belt, or else she cannot sleep in a tower and ignore her husband for 20 years. Yellow-eyed superstition and idiocy will always outlive the family that perpetrates it. I took the belt from my mother's waist. She said nothing. She never did. But when I sent out my summons for likely young women to come and try the belt to their hips, my mother closed herself up in her tower and would not come out, no matter how many sweet-cheeked maids begged her to unbolt the door. From within, she said nothing. The whole procedure took weeks. They came waltzing up to my door in every conceivable color and manner of dress, rags and bustles, blonde and black, velvet and muslin, and plain cotton sashed with rope. I slung the gold and jasper around dozens of waists. I fastened it under dozens of blushing cheeks. It slipped off their hips and cinched them till they could not breathe. No one fit the belt. No licit woman lived in all my countryside. I did what logic dictated. I went up the long, winding stair to my mother's tower, fingering the belt in my hand, watching the dim light glitter on its dull gems. Faced with the thick oak door and its bronze fittings, I knocked as politely as a suitor. "Mother," I said, "the belt fits no one." There was no sound from the room. "Mother," I said, "I must marry." There was no sound from the room. "Mother," I said, "the belt fits you." Don't be so shocked. Morality makes way for kings, and the dirt virtue of cattle farmers is of no interest to me. There was a shuffling and rustling behind the door. Finally, I was finished with her nonsense, her childish tantrums, her hiding like a crab in its scarlet shell. I put my shoulder to the hinges. I was never a weak man, and the bronze bent after only 2 blows. They bent, creaked, and gave, and my mother was sitting on a bed in the middle of a room filthy with dust, sheets tangled around her, her violet black dress torn and too small, her red hair matted and tangled, spilling onto the sagging mattress. On her lap was the hole. The edges of it crackled and warped in a way I had never seen, a strange silver light that actually rimmed the outline of a long-haired girl slumped into my mother's lap. There was nothing there, as though the girl had been ripped out of the air and left but a suggestion of what she might have looked like, of what her posture might have been. All I had seen of the whole till that morning was its absence, that this thing had weight and heft and light. There was nothing there, but the nothing glinted dully while my mother stroked its shape. "I made it," she said. Her voice creaked and groaned, a stuck door pried open. "When he took her, I made it. It was the last magic I ever did." "Magic," I snorted. "I set it to walk the house as she would have done, to eat and sleep and laugh as she would have done. But as she might have done, it kept coming here. I only came down the staircase to see you grow and watch you play and frown and sleep. It's nothing, Mother. It's less than air." She shrugged miserably. "It's not her. I know that. I'm not mad. But when I sleep, it puts its airy arms around me and I can almost smell her skin. I miss her. I just miss her. But after you killed your father, I let it stay here." I shrugged. "I wanted to be barren. I won't apologize for it. Father had let this house go to ruin, and you with it. You only married him for the sake of a gold belt, anyway." She glared at me through her ruined curls. "You'll believe what you want to believe. You believe what you want to believe, Ismail. Belts and collars. They only give you a reason to take the woman you wanted all along without giving her a space to speak." I looked at the damp, warped floor. Not out of shame, mind you, but because I thought it was what a good son in this situation might do. The belt fits no one else. My mother rested her hand on the hip of the hole, and her face seemed to sag as if some final thing slid out of it, leaving nothing but a dry shell, a sea snail rolling in the sand. "If you cannot think of a reason not to come breaking down my poor door, proposing a thing which not even a king would dare." "Would it be better if I was king, Mother?" I exploded, pushing through the hole onto the bed and grabbing her violet-wrapped shoulders. She was so thin. "If I were king, would you curtsy and put on your ermine and dance at our wedding? You know the family law. Better wedded to me than this disgusting display of magic tricks, cloistered with it day in and day out. I won't apologize for my father, and I won't apologize for you. Nothing is gotten in this world except by force. A lifetime in this dead place where nothing ever happens because the only people who live here are dead has taught me that. She started laughing, hysterical, unhinged as the door to her room. Yes, if you were king, it would be licit. Kings do what they please. Kings and their wizards, no laws for them. They take and take and take, and what does it matter? No one asks the taken. They just forget. They disappear, and everyone forgets. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly canny as a fox inside of a mouse. I'll play this game if you want to play it, Ismail mine. But you have to perform a deed of honor. That's what young men do when they're courting, if I remember. I let her go gently. Was that all? Bring her roses or a dragon scale from the furthest isles, and she'll put up no fight? What would you have me do? Not just get this over with as quickly as possible. Bring me the head and the collar, whatever other pieces you want to keep of the wizard who took your sister. Well, killing is easy work. I rose from the bed, and the whole coalesced again where I had been. I bowed to her in as courtly a manner as I have ever managed. Lady Iolanthe, I am at your service. I did not particularly want to marry my mother, you understand. If another girl had fit the belt, I would have had her just as easily. Protocol must be observed when one is of a certain station, and it wouldn't be so awful, after all, for her to stand at ceremonies and dance at balls. It's not as if she ever shared a bed with her last husband, beyond what was necessary for inheritance. I was not happy to go off and kill a wizard who had done no harm to me, besides being part of that unsavory profession, just so I could make Iolanthe a baroness twice over. But then what is happiness? I'm sure I never met the beast. It is not that we didn't know where the wizard who took my sister from us lived. There was not a farm-haggarded soul in the countryside who did not know where Omir rested his staff and vial. But one does not go demanding one's daughter back from such a man, especially when he is bound to such a king as we were ruled by in those days. That king's palace was surrounded by deep woods whose trunks were bunched and cracked as old women's spines. The thing itself was close bordered by two strange-watered rivers, one black and one white. As I crossed the bridges, I looked into the current. The black one reflected my face like the side of a dead volcano, glittering in flat shapes between ripples, showing a reasonably handsome young man who was not a prince, but might be mistaken for one on a particularly sunny day. The white river showed nothing, sheer and dull as milk. Not knowing much about how to assassinate when it is not a simple matter of a bedroom and a knife, I applied for an audience and predictably was told to wait. I busied myself as best I could, enjoyed a new kind of life, sleeping in proper rooms for once, eating at proper tables, dressing in proper clothes. I walked out to look at the rivers every day. Finally, I was called into the high-ceilinged audience chamber, heralded as Ismail of Barony Bakara. How strange it was to hear my name intoned by a bored scribe. I stood before the king and his favorite slave. The king was at his midday meal, slavering at hay in a golden trough, shoveling his face full of grass with both hands. Monstrous. Unnatural. For men to be ruled by an animal. I suppressed the urge to vomit on the silver-tiled floor. Sorrel, the centaur king of the 8 kingdoms, looked up at me, his forelegs buckled and kneeling so that he could eat his fill. His chestnut tail flicked at the air. Hay still stuck to his brown beard. Ugh, he grunted. It's you. Behind him, the wizard, in an ill-fitting blue-brown robe and a heavy iron collar that weighed on him like a penance, looked from the horseman to me with an uncertain gaze. It is him, Omir, isn't it? The centaur said, lifting his huge equine form with some difficulty from the trough and clacking his hooves on the tile, keeping his right side always to me, his left in shadow. His brown pelt flowed into pale skin that seemed to rarely see sun, and he wore, as you might expect, nothing. There was no throne. How could there be? but he rested on a pile of rose-colored cushions on a dais, I suppose for a horse that is as good as a throne. Yes, my lord, I believe it is. I'm sorry, who am I meant to be? I asked, nonplussed. Killian is meant to be in the dark, in the quiet. And there I was in a room that could not be brighter if its foundation had been sunk into the sun itself. And what's worse, expected. Sorrel scratched himself at the forelock with an expression of boredom on his moon-broad face. Omir told me you were coming, the man who would replace me. And we will pick up tomorrow night with the tale of the eight-chambered heart and the conclusion of part 1, the Book of the Steppe, which will wrap up our the horses and birds portion of this this story. So obviously, Iolanthe, we've met in previous stories and incarnations of this book. It's kind of how the Orphan's Tales rolls, if you are unfamiliar with the structure of this novel. I do remember when this first came out and I was giving interviews, there's always some question that everybody asks with every book. It'll change depending on the book, but there's always one that repeats itself in every interview. And with the Orphan's Tales, it was, I can tell you guys, I trust you, it was so annoying. Every interview was some version of, why'd you do it like that? Why'd you write the book like that, Kat? It's weird. Why don't you write it like a normal book? Why'd you do that? What were you thinking? And like, I don't know. I mean, if you would like to let me know how else to tell this story, I'm all ears. It was how you tell the story. Like the whole premise of the story was to be an Arabian Nights structural thing. It's just that unlike Arabian Nights, it kind of all comes together at the end. But apparently, all of my interviewers needed to question it. So I had to find some polite way of phrasing, because I felt like it, over and over again with those interviews. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them now. I was so flummoxed by doing this in the daylight that I didn't even bring a drink. Yeah, because it's cool, because it was awesomer that way. I don't know what their problem is, but yeah, it's the ways of interviewers, the number of times I've told the story of how Fairyland came to be written is too much for any single human being. Yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, we're drawing to the end of the horses and birds part, heading into pirates and selkies and all kinds of other craziness. Sigrid's on her way, and a couple other characters that people do tend to remember from these books. So yeah, we've got a lot ahead of us. It's going to get a lot more adventuresome and rollicking here pretty quick. While you're thinking of any questions you might have, I will do our outro stuff. As always, this has not been an audio production of The Orphan's Tales. This has been a play for legal reasons. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kat Valenti. You can subscribe to my Patreon, Kat Valenti on Patreon. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can put a coin in my tip jar if you would like to on my Instagram profile, as well as my website, katherinemvalenti.com. There's absolutely no requirement to do that. These are free from me to you, but everything sucks, and if you wanted to toss a coin to your witch, it would be deeply, deeply appreciated in this the worst timeline for anyone who tries to make a living as a freelancer and an artist. And in half an hour, you should all tune in on Twitch to my husband doing a straight-up cabaret show at Odd Job Goblin on Twitch. He's always wanted to be a torch singer. Boys don't get to be torch singers, so he's living his best life tonight. So go give him an audience. Yay, Sigrid! Tempest. I remember all the conversations we've had about Sigrid. I think that Tempest was actually there when someone tried to convince me that Sigrid was not black. I wrote her. I know I, I know what Sigrid is, but I had a fan at a convention try to convince me that she wasn't. It was an incredibly awkward situation. Um, One time I read an interview where the journalist asked, "What question do you never get but wish you did?" Okay, so I've gotten that question a lot. And I got really sick of it because that's just trying to get me to do the interviewer's work for them. So now when people ask me that question, I say the question that I've never been given but wish I would is, would you like this huge sack full of cash? And my answer would be yes. Yes, I would. So that is my permanent answer to that question. It just, I mean, you have to understand that, like, for a lot of us, there's like form, interviews are homework, and then they're kind of formulaic after a while, and then people ask a lot of the same questions, so we have to start amusing ourselves. Yay, Tempest remembers. It was incredibly awkward till it had, like, try to defend the race of my character, and I recognize, and we haven't even gotten to Sigrid yet. Half the people watching this, present and future, don't even know who we're talking about. But I gave her a super white girl's name on purpose. I understand that Sigrid is not, you don't think of a black woman when you say the name Sigrid. Like, that was on purpose to, like, mess with people's expectations of what a famous pirate named Sigrid would look like. But apparently it messed with them too much, and a whole bunch of people, or at least this person, walked away from a very explicit description of what Sigrid looks like. And not just once either, several times, assuming it was a white girl with blonde hair. And I think that says a lot more about them than it does me. But I've always really kept that in mind in the future. It was very instructive for me as a writer that, like, it's not enough to make a character not white. You really have to beat the audience over the head with it, or people will fall back on their default no matter what you've said. So I guess it was good for me as a writer, because I've always taken that to heart, that it's not enough to say it once. You got to say it more than once. She is meant to be black. There are many people on her ship and many characters who are Arab. In fact, in the Orphan's Tales universe, the default race is Persian, not white. Like, if you don't know what a character's race is, you can just assume that it's something in that Middle Eastern setting and probably be near to correct unless otherwise stated. Like, that was something I tried to do as well, because in most fantasy books, if not otherwise stated, the character is white. If this book, unless otherwise stated, the character is something in the general Persian milieu. And again, I think that was something that was a little too subtle for a lot of people. Or a lot of people don't understand that people in that part of the world have a huge variety of hair colors, eye colors, skin colors, that, like, I think people have a really hard time understanding that not everybody in one region looks the same. And I don't think that science fiction or fantasy has actually done a very good job helping with that. We of the everyone on one planet dresses and looks the same and does the same job, or everybody in one country for fantasy. So that's definitely something that our genre has not been overly helpful with. But I tried really hard in the Night Guide. And there are some things I don't think I did a great job of in there. I was 22, as I've said before. I was doing my absolute best in 2005, writing these, 2004, 2005, writing these books, and trying to do something different. And it's hard to overstate what a different world our genre was in those years. What was acceptable and what wasn't. That, like, the panels on diversity were about whether diversity was a good idea in your books. Like, we had to get up, Tempest and I both had to get up on those panels and, defend the idea that you should have representation at all in your novels. It was just a different universe. I think on the first night of this reading, I pointed out that, like, this book won the Tiptree Award. It used to be that all you had to do to win the Tiptree Award was write a bunch of fairy tales with, like, female characters at the forefront. Like, that in and of itself was to do so many of them that way, not just to retell it. I mean, that's been done by a lot of people, but to do so many of them that way was different back then. And now I would say that the Orphan's Tales feel not very revolutionary at all. Mandy says, I've been curious about that in regards to September, not that it matters, but how do I picture her? September is brown. There is a version of Fairyland where I was very explicit about her Rachel makeup, and had done a bunch of research into what groups were living in Omaha at that time. And at this point, having gone through it with so many people, I'm not even sure that I want to state the canon, because I've also talked to a number of brown little girls who whatever their own genetic makeup was took a lot from her September skin being described as brown and having brown eyes and brown hair. And I know, but I don't want to put a word on that, because I want those little girls to be able to see themselves in her no matter what their own background is. So a few years, when it came out, if people had asked me then, which they didn't, I probably would have said what the canon is in my head. But now I just want September to be available to any little girl who needs someone who looks a little like her. So I'm going to leave it at that. Sequel to Deathless. So yes, there was going to be a sequel to Deathless. I got divorced, and Russia got real complicated to write about. I'm not saying that I am going to never write that story, but it's not in me right now. So I'm writing a different thing instead of that. Well, I'm glad it's still an awesome book. But I think it's really interesting that it really, in 15 years, something can go from very, very different to its field to, I feel like The Orphan's Tales is sort of squarely normal now in what the fantasy field is. So yeah, well, I'm so glad that your kid is obsessed with September. I love September. She's my girl. She definitely, oh yeah, she's absolutely, she's not meant to be a white girl. As I said, there's a couple other things that I've written that I feel like it's better for me as the author to stay vague on it and let people have whatever they want from it and from September, from her. So I just don't want to, I know everything about my characters, but I want to give her as a blank slate to all the little girls out there who found something that reflected themselves in her. So yeah, thank you all for coming tonight. I will see you back at our normal time tomorrow. I'm learning to gesticulate with my glasses now that I wear glasses. And actually the light has gone down enough that I need them again. So I will see you tomorrow night at our usual time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Usual fairy tale time, usual fairy tale channel. Tune in on Twitch to Odd Job Goblin in half an hour for the Cooped Up Cabaret concert that is happening upstairs at that point. And I will see you all then. Thank you so much for tuning in and asking awesome questions that made me think about the past. I would love for there to be a movie of this stuff. There is a little, I again talked about this in one of the early shows, there is a little movie. There's a little puppetry / live action movie of one of the tales in the Cities of Coin and Spice. It stars Ahmed Best, who is the voice of Jar Jar Binks. Do I have a DVD of it? Yes, I do. So there is a little bit of a movie, but it was very, very indie, small time. Hopefully there will be more one day. That would be nice. So I'll see you guys tomorrow when it's dark again, like it should be when you're telling stories. It should always be dark and firelit. I hope that you're having the absolute best time that you can in this horrible situation, and that you will find something good and beautiful in staying home for so long, even if everything else is garbage on fire. I love you all so much. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I'll see you again tomorrow.